Hello, and welcome to Come to Think of It. My name is Steven Nemerovski, and I'm your host. Today's guest is Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. She is a University Distinguished Professor of Psychology at Northeastern University, with research appointments in the departments of psychiatry and radiology at the Massachusetts General Hospital. I'm going to talk to Lisa here for a second. Do you ever watch on a sports show they say the Ohio State University? For the past several years, Dr. Barrett has been among the top 1% most cited scientists worldwide for her research in psychology and neuroscience, having published over 280 peer-reviewed scientific papers that have been cited more than 100,000 times. It's a big number. She's received numerous awards, including the Director's Pioneer Award for Transformative Research from the United States National Institutes of Health, a Guggenheim Fellowship in Neuroscience, Mentor Awards from the Association of Psychological Science and the Society for Affected Science, and the Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award from the American Psychological Association. Last but not least, the William James Fellow Award for Lifetime Scientific Contributions from the Association for Psychological Science. Dr. Barrett has authored 2 best-selling books. I'm going to flag them right here. How Emotions Are Made: The Secret Life of the Brain, which will be the subject of a separate episode, and the one we're coming to think of today, 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. Doctor, welcome to Come to Think of It.
What a pleasure to be here.
I think I should get an award for reading your biography.
You totally should. You totally should. It's a lot of words.
Well, I love your books.
Thank you.
And the problem is we only have 30 minutes. We cannot do this book in 30 minutes, maybe 30 weeks. This should be like a class at the university, right?
Some people use it actually as a textbook.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. But it's not meant that way.
You got to get the viewers to read both of these books, so let's give them a nice taste, a little bit of taste of everything. First question is, you've won all these awards, you do all these things. What hat are you wearing when you write these books? It talks about neuroscience, talks about psychology, talks about psychiatry. I have a feeling there's a couple other hats in your life. So what hat are you wearing when you're writing a book?
Well, I think of myself as a translator when I'm writing a book like this. I mean, obviously I publish academic papers for scientists and other scholars, and but those are the target audience. There it's very technical. They're very technical pieces. These books are really meant for the public, and in particular, 7.5 Lessons About the Brain is a series of little essays. I really wanted to challenge myself to not even write a popular science book per se, but actually write a book of little essays that you could read on the beach or in the bathtub, or maybe polish one off, on a subway while you're going to work. And for people who don't think of themselves as interested in science or in neuroscience. Both books and pretty much all of my work integrates psychology and neuroscience, history of science, philosophy of science, linguistics, anthropology, some biology. It's evolutionary theory. It's an amalgam because I'm a person who is curious and often reads outside my own field. I think I've retrained probably 3 or 4 times in the course of my career in different fields. It's just useful. Okay,
so not unlike the brain, you're bringing a little bit of everything.
Bringing a little bit of everything. I like to say I know
neurons all over the place.
I know a little bit about a lot of things, and then a couple of things I know a bit more about.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm not going to go chapter by chapter, except for when I am. So we will start with the first chapter, which is called the 1/2 lesson. So I know you will explain the 1/2 lesson part, but it talks about the brain is not for thinking. So tell us in a half lesson why the brain is not for thinking.
If you look at the structure of the brain, the way that neurons are wired together, the way that, like, where the blood vessels are, where the other tissues are, like glial cells and so on. So if you look at the structure and you look at the evolution of the brain, what you see is that a brain's main job, every animal that has a brain, main job is to regulate and coordinate the systems of the body, of that animal's body, in a metabolically efficient way. And everything else we do, thinking, feeling, seeing, any kind of sensing, is ultimately in the service of that regulation. And of course, we don't experience ourselves that way, right? Every time, every hug I give, every insult I bear, every emotion I experience, I don't have an awareness that that has any impact on my metabolism or the efficiency with which my brain is regulating my body. But that is actually what's happening under the hood. And if you understand that, it opens up a lot of opportunities for you to have more agency in your own life.
So one of the first things that got me thinking, and I don't even know how to use the word thinking when I'm around you.
Well, you can, thinking, I mean, I'm not saying thinking doesn't exist.
No, I know it exists.
Yeah, but it's not, it isn't caused, and it doesn't unfold, and it doesn't have the causal impacts that in our popular culture that we sort of assume.
But the one thing that got me thinking was, first you're talking about the brain. Then all of a sudden, somewhere in the book, you talk about the mind. Well, brain and mind aren't the same thing. So walk me through that one.
They're not the same thing?
Well, you use them differently. You talk about almost as if the brain creates the mind,
well,
but they're not. But you use them
yeah.
specifically in different places.
Well, what I would say is your brain is, your mind is more than your brain, but you can't have a mind without a brain. And I think it's really important to distinguish when we're using words metaphorically, right, and when we're using them technically. So, sometimes we'll talk about, my gut has a mind of its own, and that's a metaphorical use. Your gut doesn't actually have a mind. It doesn't have a memory, not in the way that when we use the word memory in a technical sense, right? So we talk about muscle memory. Your muscles don't have a memory. Your brain has a memory. So what I would say is your brain has its own intrinsic dynamics. Neurons and glial cells are talking to each other all the time. And signals from the sensory surfaces of your body, your retina, your cochlea, you have receptors in your nose, you have receptors on your skin, and you have millions of receptors inside your body that sense for glucose and oxygen and carbon dioxide and all of these chemicals. Those sensors are constantly streaming signals to the brain, and the brain is processing them. And that is what your mind is. Your mind is the manifestation of all of that signal processing. Sometimes we say, your mind is what your brain does. But what your brain is doing is it's constantly taking in this huge volume of ambiguous signals, and it's compressing them and crunching them and making meaning of them. And that's what your mind is.
So just a couple of quick numbers here, because the numbers also stagger me. 128 billion neurons making up my brain. That's a lot of neurons.
Yeah, so that's, if you were a scientific, nerd like me, then you would, realize that, well, there are debates about how many neurons there are, but it's kind of in the ballpark of about that many. And then that doesn't include, though, all the glial cells, which we now know to be, which surround the neurons and which are really, really important to brain function in ways that I think 20 or 30 years ago people didn't really understand.
And then the speed aspect of this, I can't grasp the speed of this. As we were talking before the show started, when you and I are looking at each other here, we're not forming one picture, our brain's continuously viewing or continuously moving around information about what we're seeing, and there's not one picture at one time. How fast is that all happening?
Yeah, so I don't have the numbers.
And how can you even quantify it?
You can do things like stimulate a neuron in one part of the brain and measure its effects, how quickly. So what I would say is I don't have the numbers at the tip of my fingers, for example, how quickly a signal from your retina makes it to your brain. It's very fast. But I do know, for example, off the top of my head, that if you stimulate a neuron back here in the occipital part of your brain, which is typically called visual cortex, it actually, those neurons code for, they process signals other than vision, but it's called visual cortex for historical reasons, and also because dominantly that's what those neurons are processing. From there to here is about 100 to 150 milliseconds, give or take. So that's, just to put that in perspective, if I want to press a button, that takes more than 300 milliseconds.
Right.
And a moment of consciousness, people sometimes put at around 150 or somewhere between 150 and 300 milliseconds, depending on who you read. So, you can pretty much, the speed of conduction is faster than, you can push a button or, move your gaze from one place to another.
And the speed is important to me because one of the things you're essentially teaching here is that memories aren't stored. So we think we have memories, but if I understand your theories or the science correctly, they're not stored. Every time we want to have a memory, our brain recreates a set of facts that we're asking it to do, and it has to do it that fast from the second I want to think I have a memory, and then the memory's there right now. So can you talk about the fact that memories are, in fact, not stored?
Yeah, they're made. They're right. So that's not my, I will say that some of the research that I boil down in these books is my own research, but a lot of it isn't. And so I can't take claim I can't make a claim to the discovery that memories are formed. They're re-implemented in the brain. They aren't stored and then retrieved. That's been known for, at least 40 years.
Okay.
But our metaphorical use of language leads us to assume, we say, well, I retrieved that information. Well, that makes it sound like you're calling up a file from a file drawer or something.
Right.
Yeah, that's not at all what's happening. It's never happening. What's happening is that your brain is recreating signal patterns from the past. And that's what memory is. And your brain is doing it all the time, whether or not you have a feeling that you're remembering something or an awareness of remembering something. And by the time you have an awareness, the memory is already in the process of being re-implemented. It's not like you decide consciously, I'm going to remember this event from the past, and then you do. By the time you are deciding consciously to do it, it's already in play. So the brain the way to think about it is, remember how I said the brain has its own internal signaling. It's the neurons and other cells, they're signaling each other intrinsically. And with enough oxygen and nutrients, that signaling would go on forever, assuming the system is healthy. And then signals from the body, from your eyes, from your ears, all these signals, they are, in a sense, they're constraining what the brain, or influencing the internal signaling. In the next moment, that's what you remember and what you do and what you feel. So to some extent, you could say your brain is controlling your body, or you could say your brain is constrained by your body. And so when you move, when you change contexts, when you imagine something, that changes what you remember next.
So one of the analogies in your book that I found very compelling was how you talk about the brain, and you make me think of the international network of flying, where there's airports and there's hubs, but if a hub's down, I can get to my destination by going another direction. Helping me think about that brain that way was very compelling.
Yeah, yesterday I got caught in the United. There was a big IT outage across, I guess, the whole United's whole system. And a friend of mine texted me and said, "Oh, you wrote about it in your book." And I was like, "No, I wrote about when a hub goes down. I didn't write about when an entire system goes down. Then you're stuck." But yeah, the way to think about it is that the brain is a big, complicated network. And if you understand that, you realize that, well, functions aren't localized to one part of the brain, right? So we call this part visual cortex, but it's not only for vision. It has other functions. And
well, you point out in your book, neurons don't have one specific job. Neurons have multiple jobs, which makes this brain this multifaceted thing, which means that any one neuron or a lot of neurons could jump in to do things when they have to.
And in fact, they do on a regular basis. There's really lovely work by the neuroscientist named Eve Marder, and she actually won a U.S. A presidential medal of science a couple of years ago, and rightly so, because she discovered that routinely neurons are trading off with each other. So if your brain is performing a function, like to move your arm to pick up a cup, the exact neurons in your brain that direct your muscles to do this are different. Even as you are doing it, they are shifting in and out.
While you're doing it.
While you're doing it, yeah, exactly.
That's amazing.
Yep.
So that really leads me to lesson 4 from your book, which was beyond fascinating. Can it be beyond fascinating? That your brain isn't reactive. It's anticipatory. It's predictive. It is thinking ahead. So that's one part of this. But the other part is, if I read it correctly, if our brain was only reactive, it's almost as if it couldn't work because we couldn't supply it with enough materials to be a reactive brain. It only works best as a predictive brain. So can you do both of those?
I can. So first of all,
Well, I know you can.
Yeah.
Please do.
Can you predict that? Yeah. No, I mean, first of all, when we say that the brain is predicting, I'm not saying that, there's a conscious prediction like, when you're forecasting something consciously. What I'm saying is that, again, the structure of the brain, the way it works, the way it's structured and the evidence on the way it works is that it's working predictively. So think about it for a minute. If I'm a baseball player and first of all, I lived in Boston for 30 years and I was not a Red Sox fan until I learned about how the brain that the brain is predictive instead of reactive, and then all of a sudden baseball and actually every sport became incredibly interesting to me.
Okay.
Because all sports work by prediction. And if they worked by reaction, nothing would ever happen. So if I'm a batter at the plate, the traditional way of understanding how a brain works is the pitcher would release the ball, I'd see the ball, so the signal would have to go from my retina to my brain, some processing would have to happen, then there would be a motor signal that goes down my spinal cord that would, allow me to swing and hit the bat. If that actually
While
was
the ball's coming at 98 miles per hour.
Exactly. So really what's happening...
And moving.
So you could never, a batter, no matter how good you are as a batter could never, ever, ever swing fast enough to hit a ball. The way it works is the following. Your brain is using not just the sight of the pitcher and his previous experience with that pitcher. His brain is using a whole ensemble of signals that he's remembering from the past, not consciously, but the brain is reinstating those signals. How much glucose is in his body? How much oxygen? How much carbon dioxide? What is the wind like? Are there a lot of clouds? I mean, basically, all of these signals are being used, and the brain is essentially remembering. It's reinstating a collection of past experiences that are similar to the present in some way. In psychology, a group of things which are similar in some way is called a category. So essentially what his brain is doing is his brain is constructing a category of possible futures.
No, I think talking about sports, and particularly a batter and a pitcher, is just perfect to explain many of these theories in your book.
And so what's going on between a pitcher a batter is a battle of wits. The pitcher is trying, when we say the pitcher's trying to psych the batter out, the pitcher is trying to get the batter's brain to mispredict.
Correct.
So that he will hit the ball, or that he'll, incorrectly, or he'll strike out or whatever. And in fact, any kind of coordination in basketball, in football, any kind of sport, hockey, all requires that kind of prediction and correction. And so when you have a team that works really well together, it's because they are synchronized in their predictions. And that's why sports teams and actually coaches are super interested in all of this new knowledge about the predictive dynamics of brains.
One of the, you mentioned baseball, and good team to be a fan of now, Boston. There's a fascinating interview in a story about Greg Maddux, who was one of the greatest pitchers ever. And there's a vignette within there where Bobby Bonds, who was one of the greatest hitters literally go through an at-bat of what Bonds is thinking and what Maddux is thinking, of the whole history of how they've been together, how one is setting up the other, how one pitch is leading to the next one. And I think it's this amazing mental preparation that I didn't even know was happening in sports that allowed them to be as great as they were. Because they weren't just using their brain in that moment and having their brain use this collective activity. They were preparing it in advance almost to do that.
Exactly. And in fact, all of your relationships work that way. Mm-hmm. All of your relationships work that way. If you feel like, you really read your wife well, or you read your kids well, you're not reading. I mean, movements are not to be read like words on a page. Your brain is predicting, it's guessing. And it's guessing really well because you have years and years and years of experience, right, with that person. And in fact, when you meet someone and you feel really, for the first time maybe, you feel really comfortable with them, that comfort is because they're somehow similar. They're similar enough in some way to someone that you've known in the past that your predictions are working pretty well.
But even still, I'm making the predictions, but I'm continuously adjusting in the span of a prediction within my brain.
Absolutely. And this turns out to be like a really important principle. If you make yourself predictable to other people, they become more predictable to you. That's a metabolic win for everybody, but it also translates into more comfort. And that comfort can be a good thing, but it also can be a pernicious thing. Like when people are in their own little bubbles, their own little world that they've built by only looking at some media and not others, by only talking to people who are familiar or what have you. Partly what they're doing is they're optimizing to engage with people, interact with people who they can predict really well. And that's, so it can be helpful, but it can also be unhelpful at times.
And actually, I want to do some of that when we talk about how emotions are made. But while we're still on 7.5 lessons,
sure.
You talk about little brains wire themselves to their world. And there's something in there that you don't explain as well as I would want it to be explained, that there's a process that runs almost 25 years, from birth to something around 25 years.
So no, that's a process that runs your whole life.
It does run your whole life.
It runs your whole life. It's just fat. It's just
around 25 years? Or?
Well, 25 years is kind of like a number that somebody picked. That's on average is the case. But basically, infant brains are not miniature adult brains. They are brains that are unfinished, and they are waiting for wiring instructions from the world. And the way that people talk about it, the way scientists talk about it, it sounds like they're unfinished, but that at some point they'll be finished. And, like my daughter, when she turned 25, she sent me a little text that went, ding, 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 it's done, meaning her prefrontal cortex is finally wired, right? And,
good for her. She read your book.
Yeah. But the point being that your brain is, so where do the wiring instructions come? They come from the world and from the body, the internal core of your body. Those signals that are coming from those sensory surfaces, they are wiring the brain. Your brain wires itself to the environment that it inhabits, including your body and the world and the social world, the predictable behaviors from other people. But that never stops. It just happens quickly at the beginning of infancy and through childhood, and it slows down in young adulthood, and then it becomes much slower as we age. But still, if you went to another culture now and you were going to live there, you had to acculturate to a new language, new cultural practices and norms. Your brain would be wiring itself to that new world. So it never stops. It never stops. Plasticity is always happening. You're not growing new neurons in most parts of your brain. We're unlike other animals with backbones, vertebrates. We can only grow new neurons in certain parts because we're very long-lived and we need our memories, right? If you grow new neurons anywhere, they are devoid of. They can't participate in the.
They can't participate when we have to build a memory.
Yeah, well, they can participate in building new memories,
right.
but when you lose your neurons, if you lose enough of them, you lose the memories that those neurons were participating in, and so by design, really, it's not when people first started discovering plasticity, they were asking questions like, well, why can humans grow, new neurons in the hippocampus, that part of the brain? But really the question is, why did we lose the ability to grow new neurons in all these other parts, which other vertebrates show this capacity? We don't. And it's because we're very long-lived and we need our memories to survive. So I think the important thing to understand is that your brain is plastic. It's not changing as quickly as when you were a baby, but it is always changing on the scale of minutes, not hours or days or years, minutes.
Okay, we're going to get very low on time here, so I don't like to call things lightning rounds. I want to call them shorter answer things.
Wow.
If you were writing this book again, would it still be 7.5 lessons? Would it be 6.5? Would it be 8.5? And if so, what would you change?
Well, I could have written a book called 25 Lessons About the Brain. I chose seven points that the goal was to give people, really I wanted to entertain people. I wanted to show them how interesting science is. And I also wanted to give them a couple of tidbits of science that they could go and entertain their friends with, at dinner parties. Okay. So I picked the 7 topics that I thought were the most interesting to me. And one chapter, my editor thought that, I should break it into 2. And I really didn't think that so I thought it was really more like a half. And I also thought that's a kind of a cute title. So would I make it 7? I would make it 7 because it's meant to be a short book. Could I write another book called 7.5 More Lessons About the Brain? Sure. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that I didn't cover there.
All right. Very quickly, sell Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. Where do you want people to find you? Is there a website?
There is a website. My public website is called lisafeldmanbarrett.com. On that website, you can find a lot of stuff for free, articles I've written for the New York Times and for other, other outlets. The other one is called affectivescience.org.
Affective with an A.
Affectivescience.org. Affective-science.org. That has all of our scientific papers available for download.
Well, thank you very much. You've been a great guest, and thank you.
Have you ever felt lost in the voting booth? With 518,000 elected officials in the United States, it's no wonder. Elections are complicated. From local school boards to the presidency, there are so many choices. And that's where Ballotpedia comes in, your one trusted source, because the only unknown on your ballot should be who gets your vote. Our sample ballot lookup tool shows you exactly who and what will be on your ballot. Just enter your address, select your upcoming election, and prepare to vote informed. You can even save your favorites and print your completed sample ballot. With Ballotpedia, Vote with confidence and vote informed.